Randy Kraft is one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history, tied to nearly 70 murders, most in California, but he also paid a short visit to Grand Rapids. 35 years after his arrest, the man who became known as the Scorecard Killer is still alive on death row in California.
Well, better late than never. I said I was going to post a new documentary last week on Tuesday, and well, it is Tuesday, so here I am. I've been working on it, and I'm finally posting it today. I've been sick lately, and there's been a lot going on, so I didn't have a chance to get done. Anyway, tonight I decided, well, the last couple of days, going through everything I had done, I decided after watching this documentary on Tubi, which has got ads in it, and you can listen to me for free, no ads as well. It was a descent of a serial killer, and it's Randy Kraft. A lot of what I talk about is what they said. I just kind of put it into my own little words, and I'm gonna, add a little footage here and there. Hopefully I don't get copyright like I keep getting on my other ones. And I hope that this is a little more entertaining. For the risk of possibly repeating myself, I also have several different things from Wikipedia, other research I've done and things like that. So I might kind of say some similar things along the way, but I'm not trying to repeat myself. Just bear with me. I have sometimes the memory span of a gnat, but before I get into too many details, I'm going to post a trigger warning. And there's a lot going on in this video. It's torture, rape, murder, dismemberment, all kinds of things, and I just want to give you a heads up. This man was crazy. He was very, very, I hate to say sadistic, because in this documentary that's all they say, but he's like the devil. He's my series is Monsters Walk Among Us, and he definitely is the definition of a monster. If there was a devil in the form of a man, this man is it. So I hope you enjoy this, and if you do, like and subscribe to my channel and get notified when I post things. I'm about to start now. So today we're talking about Randy Kraft. Like I already said, this is a recent photo of him in jail. As a homosexual killer of young men, Randy Kraft virtually unparalleled in the number of people that he has murdered. Known to investigators as one of the most sadistic, as I've already said, it's going to be said a lot, sadistic serial killers ever encountered. He was charged with only 16 murders of 16 young men, but he's believed to have murdered over 60 young men during a period of 12 years, between 1971 and 1983. He was labeled the Freeway Killer, during the investigation, until later on they discovered he was keeping a scorecard. So then they renamed him the Scorecard Killer. Anyway, he was murdering these young men in an area of California south of LA. Wherever he went, whether traveling for business or otherwise, young men died in horrific ways. Randy Kraft seemed to have had a normal home life. He was born in 1945 as well, with his mother and father together his whole life, and 3 sisters. And there weren't really any indications that he'd become what he'd become later. His father had a good job. Mom worked as a school. She was PTA in the PTA, and just all around great mom, very invested in her kids' lives, and she was always there. And any chance she could, she made a fuss over her little boy. He was the only little boy, doting mom that everyone says, doting mom. And the sisters made a fuss over him as well. They doted after him as well, also. Other than injuries, as a 1 year old, he suffered from a broken collarbone, and then shortly later he fell down the stairs, and then a year later he sustained a head injury. Then it was looked at like a clumsy boy. He was just young and learning to walk and, clumsy. But nowadays it would cause, concern with people. You take them to the emergency room that many times in that short period, CPS would be notified. Now, it would cause alarms. It would make you think that he was possibly being abused. There was no proof that he was, but there also wasn't any proof that he wasn't. So, anyways, but none of that took place back then. They didn't call CPS and things like that like they do nowadays. Anyways, his father wasn't very affectionate with Randy. He wasn't very loving towards him. This is a rare photo of him and his father in a photo booth. He was mainly partial to his daughters, and a lot of people speculate that Randy noticed the difference, and he did risky behavior for attention seeking at a very young age, and that caused the injuries. So but like I said, there's no proof. No one actually knows what happened. It was possible that Randy's father might have noticed the psychopath tendencies and it was turned off by it, that made him shy away from him. And mothers loving like she was, doting, and sisters like they were, wouldn't really look at it that way. They would be like, oh, boys will be boys, he's just learning, he's just being a boy, but a lot speculated that maybe the father noticed something at an early age and just didn't say it. He just kind of stayed away. Generally, psychopathy starts showing up before the age of 5. They start to learn to lie, manipulate. They show rage towards other people. And like I said, the father possibly noticed it. Fathers tend to notice things a little bit quicker than mothers do. It's like a maternal thing for us. But anyways, also his classmates, people that remember growing up with him, noted that he was very dominating, and he was closer to the right of Attila the Hun, which is very troubling because he was being compared to someone that was despot and killed thousands of people. So that was kind of alarming there. And please forgive me, I made notes and my handwriting is completely awful after all these years of using a phone instead of handwriting, and I'm looking down a lot trying to figure out what I wrote. I came up, took notes and just can't understand my own writing. The description of him being like that was being reported of him by his childhood people that knew him, his friends, as a child, just a child. And anyway, it was later stated that he had a rigid belief system, and he was what people call hypermorality. And he also had, as a schoolboy, had a close obsessive relationship with his mother, and then a very different relationship with his father, as we've already said. And they were very religious, and his mom and sisters primarily influenced that. They took a great deal of interest in Randy. They especially, had their hands on with his education. They made sure, he was doing good, and they praised him, and, everything. That's one reason he did so great, I think, is because of his, support system. But when he got closer to high school age, he started bucking the system, started being more rebellious and having authority problems, issues with authorities. In fact, there was an instance where he challenged his teacher, saying that the rules didn't apply to him. So, it did, his rebellion didn't affect his grades because he still got a great GPA, but this quite often happens when dealing with bright young students. They rebel, they think they're above the law, I guess. I don't know, I might be saying that wrong, but they become bored when they're smarter than most of their peers, and when kids get bored, they tend to stay in trouble. So the lack of interest from his father also could have contributed to his need to stand out against his siblings in an attempt to get attention from his dad. His intelligence gave him delusions of grandeur, and this led to him breaking rules, testing boundaries with authority figures, and just to test how many limits he could push before receiving punishment. There was no proof of him being abused by his family, his parents, being abused as a child. But it's a possibility that he hurt himself with his increased risk-taking behavior, and reducing his ambitions and the fear most children would experience. As a child, he didn't act like most children. He took risks that most children wouldn't take, I guess some people say. And some people believe that he harmed himself, possibly for the attention. Like, he was striving for attention. Even though he got attention from his mother and his sisters, he just longed for the attention from his father. But anyway, so Randy graduated 10th in his class at Westminster High out of nearly 400 graduates. He ended up getting a scholarship to a school called Claremont College, which, from what people say, is very hard to get scholarships, and it's one of the toughest schools in the Pomona area. And he became conservative. I really don't talk about politics much, but for some reason this is a thing that they talk about throughout this whole documentary. I guess because of how easily manipulated he was to change sides, or the hyper morality situation. He became, like I said, conservative, and started having support of the efforts of the Vietnam War. He was supporting the efforts of the Vietnam War. And then he entered college as a Republican and very religious. And then he was very enthusiastic about entering the ROTC program at Claremont. The ROTC program gave him the scholarship, but he had to, basically fulfill his scholarship by entering, making a commitment to go into the military as an exchange for the scholarship. So he basically signed up for military early on. And although his schooling was being paid for in 1964, he got a job at the cocktail lounge. It was a gay bar. Oh, sorry, I was cold. So after he began working at this bar, people said that he started changing. He wasn't quite so Republican, he wasn't quite conservative, and he started showing gay tendencies. He changed everything about himself, his appearance, he grew his hair out long, and he became more party driven. Like, he started hanging out in bars and clubs more often, and his schoolwork started to suffer. His attendance suffered. He got involved in the drug scene, and he started spending more and more time away from his own place where he was living at the college, and disappeared for days on end. And his grades just began to fall, and he just became a completely different Randy altogether. Rumors started. They started saying things like, "Look out for the Randy guy. if you hook up with him, he's kind of a sadist, and he likes picking up young boys and do not so nice things to them. He began to have migraines and stomach problems, so then he started to he started to disappear more often, and he began taking Valium to alleviate the headaches and the stomach troubles. Back in those days, being gay, was unheard of. So I'm probably taking Valium to relieve some of the stress as well. No one wanted to come out of the closet. You were ostracized and shunned from your friends and family. It was a crime to everyone. That was 50 years ago. So, such a different time for everybody. But in late 1966, Kraft had his first brush with the law. The incident happened when he solicited an undercover cop for sex. This was the only incident he had with the police at the time. So, due to having a clean criminal record, he was released. Not even a slap on the wrist. Randy hadn't exhibited any red flags this far that would alarm officers or anyone for that matter. His intelligence allowed him to articulate and manipulate others to get what he wanted. So he started, using that, I guess, during this time. But in 1967, changes in his personal life were reflected. In his political allegiance, he became more liberal and was a huge supporter of Kennedy. He was devastated by his assassination, and he actually had campaigned for Kennedy and rallied for him. Anyway, shortly after, he started gambling, staying out all night, cavorting around, and he started heavily drinking. His Valium addiction got worse and worse. He frequented the gay scene more and more, and it's believed that was around the time he discovered the BDSM scene, bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism. Most people that belong to the BDSM scene aren't serial killers or violent killers in general. They have rules they live by, and it's a fantasy-based activity among consensual adults, and those with darker fantasies will often experiment within the commitment, and they find that the fantasy isn't enough. The idea of enacting out scenarios with consenting partners is unfulfilling, leading them to want more. Then these individuals will escalate into something completely different. They'll morph into what they really are, which is someone that wants the act to be more violent, and they want non-consent. They want to take advantage of people and harm them, and sexual predatorial behavior. They want to inflict pain upon their victims and against their will. That's what really turns them on. And then they're truly sadistic, which what really sets off their arousal is the suffering and humiliation of somebody, and the degradation of individuals. And massive flag here. It's a transgression of the consensual boundaries of BDSM when his partner's consent is invariably violated by Randy's extreme behavior. So he wanted to inflict damage and pain and torment them. Once he got into that BDSM, he had no intentions on following the rules or playing nice. Yeah, quite the opposite. So his intentions were purely evil. And that's where it started. And this is what begins his life of sadism, I guess you could say. So time passes, and after all his shenanigans, he eventually starts failing, and he had to retake his senior year again. Well, then he eventually he graduated, and as promised, he went on to the military. He enlisted for active duty with the Air Force. And right from the get-go, he got entry-level security because of his wit and his genius. But that didn't last long, because for some reason, even though it was not allowed in the military, Randy came out to his superiors. And instead of them accepting them, of course, like I said, it was not, you weren't allowed to do that back then. They gave him a medical discharge. Now, somebody, God or somebody, there was a higher power looking after him, because he was supposed to be dishonorably discharged. Yet, Randy was pissed about that still, even though, he didn't get the maximum punishment. And, I think he even appealed it, even though he knew, those were the rules back then. But this is when things really seemed to take a really drastic turn for Randy. He moved back home with his parents, and I think at age 24, nobody knew about his run-in with the law this time, and he was 24 at the time he moved back. He told his parents and his family that he was gay. He came out of the closet. Of course, his dad, oh my God, he was outraged, and mom was very disappointed, and so were the sisters. Sisters blamed the college of all men, going to college with only men. The mom, was a phase. He'll get over it, she was hoping, wishing for the best. But they just all decided that they were going to just basically ignore it and just love Randy. They didn't want to lose him. But that's what they eventually started doing. He started distancing himself. And being more party going and staying gone, and there was a noted mark in his increase in alcohol use as well as amphetamines. Randy began living a life that no one knew of. No one knew what he was doing, and no one could ever think he was doing. And at this point, this is when Randy became the deviant of the most dangerous kind. This is when his first victim, luckily he lived, but it was a 13-year-old boy, and he met him at the beach. He lured him with marijuana, pornography, and drugs. It's a teenage boy, and pills, and he got him messed up and took him back to his house, stripped him, and repeatedly raped him. Fortunately, the boy was able to escape, even, in his state. And the citizens, probably the neighbors, had seen, and they called 911. And when the boy was questioned, he admitted to the abduction, but he was embarrassed about the sexual assault, like I said, about gay things back in the days. So he left that out of the statement. Well, that's when the police fumbled the ball. So the police went to his apartment and searched it without a warrant. And even though there was proof that he was a sexual predator, because of that one thing, they couldn't do nothing about this poor kid being abducted, and they couldn't do nothing about Randy Kraft in general, so he got dismissed, no charges. It's crazy. Had there been no mistakes, I'm guessing some things might have been way different. But this did give him a cool down period where he had to reevaluate things. So, perfect his MO and see what he did wrong and try to make sure he doesn't mess up again. But it also fueled an insatiable appetite. That one abduction and rape just got his motor going. He just got excited more and more. So even though I'm pretty sure that put a stop to everything, it didn't for long.
The victim escapes, as Kraft experienced in 1970 with this 13-year-old boy, who fortunately escaped likely death. A smart, organized serial killer like Randy Kraft is going to regroup. He's going to be freaked out by it. He's going to be watching to see if there's any news reports. He's going to cool it off for a while. And he's going to figure out, what did I do wrong? What do I need to do so that this doesn't happen again.
And if they're particularly intelligent, as in the case of Kraft, they use their intelligence to figure out a better way to perpetrate these crimes, a better way to lure their victims into these situations.
It made Randy decide that he, instead of using marijuana and alcohol, that he was going to start using higher dose things like Valium and alcohol. And that would make them completely helpless and help him, you know, make sure that they don't do that again. Render him almost unconscious, you know. So during, I guess, his cool-off period, Randy went to further his career at college, and he also found him a reliable job as a forklift driver. And he was studying engineering when he met a 19-year-old boy named Jeff Graves. Graves would later tell investigators that Kraft had a mysterious side to him, that he took off and he left for a day, sometimes days at a time. And you know, there's other times like he would take his Valiums and flare up and get enraged. He had a temper. So that was in 1971, by the way, when he met Graves. And so as of October 5th, 1971, after Jeff Graves and him met, there's a nude body of a 30-year-old man, Wayne Duquette, found.
On October 5th, 1971, the nude body of a 30-year-old man by the name of Wayne Duquette was found along what's called the Ortega Highway in Southern California. He had last been seen a few weeks earlier on September 20th.
This would become his first murder victim, and actually the first identification on his scorecard.
Duquette was a bartender at a local bar called The Stable, which catered to gay patrons.
He bound him up, he tortured him, he beat him, and then he dumped his body on the side of the road.
His body was in a condition where investigators couldn't determine an exact cause of death. In fact, they ended up ruling the cause of death for Mr. Duquette as alcohol poisoning.
Okay, so the body count began to multiply, and there was now 14 victims in only a 3-year span. 3 years. And the investigators were trying to connect everything. Now, at the time, there was 3, like, freeway, highway killer type guys. Patrick Kearney, but he was a stabbing. I think he stabbed, and they said something about trash bags. He threw his bodies in trash bags. I'm not sure quite. And then there was William Bonin, who strangled his victims, but it was the same type. It was young men. And then, of course, there was Randy Kraft. Randy Kraft, though, his stuck out amongst the rest as, you know, the most brutal one. So, of course, they started piecing together which was which. And, you know, they didn't know who Randy Kraft was at the time, but they did know who Randy Kraft murdered. His appetite for destruction and terror and torture and pain just became worse and worse. His lust for it was growing stronger and stronger by the day. And it was evident looking at the victims piling up one by one. The torment just got more and more brutal and violent. It's just horrifying. And notably at this time, he was not only was he taking Valiums and drinking alcohol, but he was mixing this up with methamphetamines as well.
As psychologists, as mental health workers, we look at the predominance of amphetamines in culture really as a scourge. It's problematic because more so than almost any other substance that is used recreationally, it can cause marked personality changes at a rapid pace, especially for those that are heavy and chronic users.
In 1976, Randy gets him a new boyfriend. His life changes. His name's Jeff Sealing, and they start experimenting with multiple sex partners. Even though Sealing was giving Randy Kraft everything he wanted, the adventures, the non-monogamy, and all that, Sealing did mention to the investigators that Randy would act strange and just disappear sometimes. He said, but as far as he knew, he was never sleeping around on him. The only time he had sex with anyone else was when they were having their threesomes. But I guess after all that, the two of them eventually moved in together. Even though Sealing was giving Randy Kraft everything he wanted, the adventures, the non-monogamy, and all that, Sealing did mention to the investigators that Randy would act strange and just disappear sometimes. He said, but as far as he knew, he was never sleeping around on him. The only time he had sex with anyone else was when they were having their threesomes. But I guess after all that, the two of them eventually moved in together. They moved in together in Laguna Hills. At this point, Kraft went kind of on a cooling off, a hiatus. He, in terms of his killing spree, he and Jeff went to couples therapy, and they went to work on aspects of their relationship. And I'm guessing it's from what the therapist notes said, was he had to give him up for the trial. So the therapist noted in his documents that that Kraft was highly tense and always wound up tightly and concerned with his partner a certain dominance. He had to be the dominant one. He didn't like being dominated. And he had a constant need for control. And I'm guessing by what he's done, I've already talked about it, that's a given. And he also noted that Kraft was hypersexual, which I could go and tell you that much. From earlier when they said the hypermorality, that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on that chart it said that was part of it. And he had insatiable sexual appetite that his partners just couldn't fulfill, and that Jeff, I guess, Sealing felt like he couldn't. And at this point in time, eventually, after all this, Kraft began yelling again. Once a killer, always a killer. They don't completely stop. Vanishing for periods at a time would normally cause suspicion, but for him being on all those drugs and being an long-term addict, couples, partners, they just say, you know what, they're doing it again. They're on a binge. I'll let them go. No search warrant, no cops called, no looking for them. They know what to expect. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He wasn't on a drug-filled binge. He was doing way worse. And his monogamous relationship wasn't thrill-seeking enough. He had to go out and do more. 14 potential murders over only 3 years span was quite clear of an indicator that the need, frequency, and severity of his appetite, it was getting stronger. And he was getting really comfortable, feeling invincible above the law. It was basically like he was challenging the law like he did when he was younger, and challenged authority like he had. He was beginning to find compulsion. He was getting very compulsive and doing what he decided he wanted to do, which is a deadly combination with all the thrill-seeking, the drugs, all the things that's been going on with him. And that's why things started escalating. But for a while, things were going good. But eventually, it just wasn't enough. That one partner he had just wasn't enough. So things started to fall apart with Jeff, and the murder started up again. So just one thing after another, he just was never gonna stop. So in 1975, he started working as a computer operator at the Long Beach airport. In March of that year, he made an error. The day was March 29th, 1995. A kid named Crotwell was last seen hitchhiking. Kraft picked him up, but this 19-year-old boy was actually around friends. The friends saw the car, and when the boy's head, because Kraft decided to decapitate this poor child, when his head turned up, the kids got in touch with authorities and told them about the car. But not only did they tell the authorities about the car, but they went and found the car, wrote down the registration, and got the cops to run it, and lo and behold, it was Kraft's car. But Kraft, somehow or another, talked him out of being the bad guy and said, yeah, he was with him, but last he saw him, he was alive. He dropped him off at an all-night diner. And the cops believed him, and once again, he got away. This is getting a little repetitive. It's, I think, the third time. But that ain't the only time he escaped eviction. This would be the fourth time. This time around, it was in 1975. He was picked up for lewd conduct. And he got away without going to jail. No charges filed. So, anyways, Randy just felt invincible. He started killing everywhere he went. Everywhere. If he was there, somebody died. And he would travel, as a matter of fact, to Michigan and Oregon for work. And bodies were piling up there as well. I'm going to show you a scene. I'm going to show you a news report of two of the ones that were really heartbreaking to me. I couldn't find a whole lot of things, but I did find some things that I'm going to try to show you guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Sterling.
And I'm Susan Shaw. That killer's name, Randy Kraft. He's suspected in nearly 70 murders, most of them in California.
But the so-called Scorecard killer also paid a short visit to Grand Rapids, just a few days on a business trip. But it was enough time to take the lives of two local men.
The 4 days that he spent here changed the world for two families.
On December 9th, 1982, a frigid Thursday morning, the bodies of two men, both face up, one naked, the other shoeless and without a coat.
We had two bodies that were obviously molested and mutilated and unclothed and dead.
They lay feet to feet at a right angle, frozen and partially drifted over with snow. The drag marks left by their heels spoke for themselves. It wasn't long before they identified the bodies. 20-year-old Christopher Schoenborn and his 24-year-old cousin Dennis Alt.
It's something that you can only imagine might happen to somebody else. Truly. These things don't happen to ordinary people like us.
And I find it strange that he picked these two victims because they were clearly known to their community and they were clearly loved. Because generally, Randy's MO was quite organizational. It was made a lot of sense, organizational sense, and he picked people that were stranded that probably weren't missed, and hitchhikers and things and like that. People that were just trying to get, from maybe possibly town to town, or just trying to get away from maybe bad situations. You don't want to get a high-profile case on you because that's going to cause a huge, massive police investigation. That's something, he didn't want. But he, like I said, these guys, they seemed really loved, But he had multiple opportunities in Southern California because that was back then. Hitchhikers are all over the place, and a lot of people were just trying to get to the other side of town. They were looking for a helping hand. They sure as hell didn't get that, but he grabbed them, drug them up, dragged them around, and nobody noticed they were gone. In Kraft's case, there's something really complex because of the growing severity with which he treated his victims' bodies after they died. The escalation of desperation, that it wasn't only sexually derived pleasure, it was about the torture. It was about watching them die, feeling them die, and then also really disrespecting their corpses. Like he tried to do the most devious things he could think of. And he was genuinely one of the most sadistic killers to ever be encountered. He did everything he could to watch somebody suffer just for his pleasure, and he burned them, he cut them, he emasculated them, he put objects inside them, both their rectum, their penis, and he did anything and everything to humiliate them, harm them, and watch them suffer. These boys' final moments were unimaginable in terms of level of suffering. Man, it's ridiculous. It's crazy. Their final moments were just something worse than a horror movie. And they were young. They had a whole life ahead of them, and this man did this to them. He mutilated and did most of his damage to them while they were still alive. I mean, they felt everything, just about. And when you start talking about realistic sadism, sexual sadism that's inflicted upon a victim for pleasure, to the torturer, that's a cognitive process. It's not really an emotional one. It's inflicting a fantasy that operates in their head that's very sexually arousing to them, and it's fusing of sex and violence. And he used his job to dump these bodies, and he came up with some way to get his victims and bypass the law, whatever he could do. I mean, just very smart, genuine, genius man, and could have had so much potential, did this. I mean, and like I said, he confused the police by doing that, dumping bodies over different state lines, because cops don't communicate, They find bodies and they try to investigate in their jurisdiction. They don't call other jurisdictions. And that made things difficult back then as well. And moving the bodies, taking people from different state lines like that would keep the amount of bodies undetected. But decoding that scorecard must have been something shocking for law enforcement, as they finally got to they got the truly gruesome picture of what occurred. There appeared to be no end to Kraft's insatiable appetite for damage and murder, but even the most confident killers eventually make mistakes. And that mistake was on May 14, 1983. Kraft was driving in the early morning hours and driving erratically on the freeway, and he got pulled over for a DUI stop. He confidently gets out of his car, pants unbuckled, falling down at his waist, and acts like he's going to pass his sobriety test. Well, as the sobriety test was taking place, one of the other officers, because the DUI stops, there's always two, one of the officers is looking in the window, and they see this young man dressed in a Marine outfit, slumped over, like sleeping, and it seems like he's not breathing. And at first the officer thinks maybe it's just kind of, drank too much and not breathing hard. The officer realizes he's not breathing at all. As they walk up, they start noticing wounds to the man and visible ligature marks on his neck, and they realize this man's dead. Boom, right away they get a search warrant for the car, they get a search warrant for Kraft's apartment, and they start digging, they start investigating Kraft. Tony Gamble, the young Marine in that car, was his last victim, and he was the one who brought this man to justice, thank the Lord. And due to Randy Kraft, like I said, thinking he was untouchable and invincible and would never get caught. But whenever they did do the search for his apartment, they found pornographic Polaroids, a lot of them depicting Kraft in sexual situations with minors. Many serial killers, especially methodical ones like him, collect trophies, and they document their kills by writing, in code. And that is they also can collect items. Most of the time, from what I've done research on, they usually collect one thing from everyone. But this man, he took notes describing what he'd done. He took items of clothing, and he took Polaroids. I mean, he had to have it all, It just, they serve as reminders of the pleasure they had, and they relive that pleasure with these items. I don't know daily what, I guess when they think about it, they go to it and pleasure themselves, or they do whatever whatever serial killers do, if I could get into their mind, I'd be going to check myself into the mental institution. But they memorialize their heinous acts in an item or a note, or living in their mind ain't enough. And in this case, he used codes. In his book, he used code words, like I sort of talked about with Duquette being stable, and he wrote his most enjoyable kills down, and that's kind of telling, because that's 67 of them in a scorecard. So it had names and dates and references, of what had happened and what he had done. It was inconceivable that a human being could do these kind of things. And he was a monster. I don't think he was a human being at all. But the investigators believed he had maybe up to 67 people that he killed. And according to someone, McDougal came forward saying that he was an accomplice, and that 67 was quite a low number. But if it wasn't thrilling enough and exciting enough of a kill, that Randy would just not write it down at all. It was like a bad date. Never thought of again. These boys, some of his murders weren't even worth writing down, weren't even worth thinking about. Total monster. As police went through these cases, the dates associated with them and all that, they started making connections to 46 different homicide cases. So agencies began to work together, the different states and everything else. And they put all the murders that seemed to fit Kraft's patterns together. Everything started to mesh. Everything started to come together. And now law enforcement is ready to prepare for trial. They began interviewing hundreds of witnesses. There was victims in Oregon, Michigan, and California, like I've already stated. And they were identified after the search of his home revealed items such as clothing, jewelry, and someone's belt. And definitely there was 2 victims definitely identified by those items. They were the boys that were in the video earlier that were killed in Michigan. And like I said, anywhere Randy went, anywhere he traveled, people were dying in horrific ways. So, and like I said, the scorecard listed 67 people, but there were more than 20 bodies that they still hadn't found. And unfortunately, in the long run, they couldn't charge him but with 16, which that was enough, but not for the families of all of the victims. But they had like concrete evidence that could solidify the death penalty with those 16 victims. So they went ahead and they charged him with those. They wanted him gone. Like I said earlier, if I really knew what a serial killer thought, I would just go put myself in a mental institution. I wouldn't want to have those thoughts. But scientists have spent years, so many years, trying to figure out what makes a serial killer a serial killer. And they've come out with tests and all these scenarios and things. And they found brain scans to test and see, I guess the differences in one brain than the other. Well, they used that brain scan on Randy Kraft, and it showed his brain was way different than someone that wasn't a murderer, and that the area of his brain that regulates rage, anger, and temper control is completely abnormal. And what's significant about this is you take into consideration the brain scan results, the head trauma as a child, the combination of his liberal use of methamphetamines and substances and alcohol. That automatically shows you that's a dangerous combination. His risk-seeking behavior, along with that, everything that went wrong. It just was. He was made as he not only was made by his brain into a serial killer, but he helped it out with the drugs and everything else. And maybe it could have been prevented. I don't know. I discussed this in the beginning of my video, the documentary, A Descent into a Serial Killer, Randy Kraft. It's season 8, episode 8, I believe. At the beginning, it's talking about red flags that were in Randy's life, and should law enforcement have been able to pick up those red flags early enough? And truthfully, no. The answer is they couldn't have. He was smart enough to always remain on the edge, but within the boundaries of society. One thing that was troubling, though, was once they put a task force together to find a serial killer, they brought in these psychologists, and they were coming up with these wild ideas as to why, guys like Randy commit crimes. Like, one said his victims didn't feel like a man, so they wanted to make his victims into a woman so he could feel more powerful. But that was just crazy because, his murders were motivated by that. He was a gay man. He wanted to be with the other gay men, and it had nothing to do with any women. But as a matter of fact, from something I had Googled, I read a long time ago, there's something called internalized homophobia, and that is where they hate the fact that they're gay, and they hate the men that they find attractive, that they blame their attraction for them on the actual individual that they're attracted to. So that, along with his religious background and the way society, it was a taboo to be gay back in those days, and how everyone was shunned upon and looked at. Randy, I think, was a self-hater. He hated himself. He was homophobic to himself. I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I'm glad that the law enforcement got better. I think they have, because there was at least four attempts they could have arrested Randy Kraft, and they never did. I know it was a long time ago. I hope training got better, and I know forensics has brought more cases to light and everything like that, but every time I turn around, like cases like Jeffrey Dahmer, there could have been so many victims that were saved had they just paid attention. It's just what made it way worse was every time he got away with his crimes, he got more and more, like I said, invincible, feeling cocky. He started thinking he would never get caught, and he got more reckless, and he got more madness in his kills. At the end of the trial, Judge McCartan tried to convince Kraft to give some insight as to where the victims, may have been, to give a little peace of mind to the family, and that it'd be detrimental in a sentence, and it would help. It possibly would get the death penalty off the table, but Kraft just sat there and said he was innocent. It didn't faze him none. It's been 50 years since he was convicted, still sitting in death row. And the reporters, investigators, everyone that had a hand in this case said that it seems like it's never ending. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you a report of a recent victim that was just ID'd as one of Kraft's victims.
Welcome back. A teenager believed to have been murdered 49 years ago in Aliso Viejo has finally been identified. Michael Ray Schlick's body was found near a trail back in 1974. He was from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Investigators initially ruled his death as accidental, but now they say suspect he was likely a victim of a serial killer, Randy Kraft. Last year, Schlick's tissue samples helped create a DNA profile that led to his ID.
Sorry, but my cat's here to say hi. These poor innocent kids were just looking for a hand, a ride to get somewhere they got to go, and they weren't looking for trouble, but that's what they got. And it's crazy. They were tortured and just everything just possibly wrong in this world. It happened to them. And of course, investigators and people can't stop thinking about it, because who could? It's an awful thing to know that there were 67 victims, but when you hear that the death toll could be over 100, that's even worse. He is definitely a monster. And I don't think that he'll ever tell anyone the truth. I think that he's going to take the truth to his grave. I don't think he's going to make it to lethal injection. I think he'll die of natural causes before he's executed. And he's going to still maintain his innocence. There will never be any closure for these families. And it's grim, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes. But if you enjoyed my channel, please let me know, and like and subscribe so you can be notified whenever I post anything new. And I love suggestions and I love comments, so please let me know what you think. Just anything. Write me anything. Thank you.